Expansion cards. What do I mean when I talk about expansion cards? Well, before I talk about that, I guess you need to remember that, we just talked about ESD. First, you have to establish an ESD-free work environment. That means being grounded and doing everything you need to do to rid your body of static electricity. Now, this is probably the most common task you'll be asked to do inside of a computer case. Somebody gets a new graphics card. They want to put it in their case. They don't know how to do it, so they come to you. What do you do? Or maybe it's your own machine, and you're getting a new graphics card, or maybe a really fast gigabit network interface card. These are really common things. So we've talked about the motherboards. We haven't really looked at power supplies yet. We've talked about processors. RAM we'll get to. ROM BIOS we'll get to as well. This is the one we're talking about today, expansion cards. Why do they call them expansion cards? Because you're adding new capabilities to your computer. Okay? Expansion cards are called a lot of things. Adapter boards, interface cards. Most commonly, people just call them cards. A graphics card. I put a graphics card in my computer. That's about all they say. You could say graphics adapter, or a GPU, a graphics processing unit, but most people just say, oh, it's a graphics. Now on the card there's ports that provide additional functionality and ways to go send input into the computer and output from the computer. And these cards can have one of three different voltages: 3.3 volts, 5 volts, or 12 volts. So inside the computer, once it gets past the power supply, the highest voltage you're going to see is 12 volts, which isn't very much. Not life-threatening, let's just say it that way. We've talked about buses before, but bus is actually two things. It's made of two things. It's a set of wires that connect the card to the CPU, and there are specific buses for that. 2 days ago we looked at PCI card slots. We saw PCI Express card slots. So both of those are on our motherboards that we were looking at. So it's a combination of the set of wires, but it's also the set of rules that describe how data is sent along those wires. There's a bus master, and what a bus master does is it makes sure that the data along the bus is controlled and doesn't overwrite data coming from somewhere else. So that's why they have a bus master. Keeps track of when zeros and ones get sent along the bus. There's different types of buses. PCI we saw. AGP, not so much. Some of the older motherboards have AGP in them. And then finally PCI Express. What's the most up-to-date technology for cards today? And that's PCI Express. When you go down to Fry's or online and you're trying to get a graphics card, those will be the ones that are cutting edge. If you have an older machine that doesn't have a PCI Express slot, then you have to step back to PCI. If you don't have those kind of slots, but have an AGP slot, then you can put an old AGP card in. But the performance there is going to be pretty terrible. Okay, PCI, what does that stand for? Peripheral Component Interconnect. Yes, another three-letter acronym. This used to be the fastest, but not so much anymore. There's a better and faster bus that are available in newer computers, and that's the PCI Express. Now on the motherboard we saw them as short white sockets. They don't take a lot of voltage, so just 3.3 volts to drive the bus. It's not bad. On the motherboards we're looking at, they're only included there for backward compatibility. If you're going to be buying new components, the expectation is you're going to use the PCI Express slots for that. The last bus is called a AGP bus. It's only used for video. It doesn't have multi-purpose capabilities like a PCI or PCI Express bus has. AGP is only for graphics. But now AGP has been pretty much replaced by PCI Express. Here's a AGP card. And what gives it away as being an AGP card, a couple things. You'll note that the contacts to the AGP card, they're gold-plated, and they're really tightly packed right next to each other. But the thing that gives it away is the distance from the back of the computer where the bracket is to when the socket starts. AGP sockets are set back from the back of the computer by a long distance. In contrast, we can take a look at a current PCI Express card. It's much larger. The contacts are even more closely packed. They're shorter, looks like. And these are like mini computers in themselves, these new graphics cards. Look how thick it is. It takes up 2 slots inside the computer. It's got its own fan as well. So it's like a little tiny computer inside your computer. Sometimes the graphics card costs more than the motherboard. For true gamers, they like to get the beefiest kind. So this is a Asus GeForce, but I don't know the number. Big difference between this tiny little card and that massive card from Asus for doing graphics. What bus does this use? That's a PCI Express. You can tell PCI Express because it has this little clip right here. And that's to keep the graphics card from coming disconnected from the motherboard. Okay, so again, the way you differentiate AGP cards from PCI Express or PCI cards is that distance from the bracket to where the contacts plug into the slot. Usually the slot it plugs into is brown. Brown isn't a very common color inside of a computer case. They use brown to indicate that it's an AGP card slot. So the newest standard is PCI Express. This is actually a serial technology, whereas PCI was more of a parallel technology. Now at first, PCI Express was used for graphics cards only. It wasn't for anything else. But we saw on our motherboard that there's actually 2 slots there. One's a little short one, the other one's long. Most of the slots now inside a computer, especially the brand new motherboards, are all PCI Express. I would imagine there's some that don't have any PCI slots in it anymore. PCI Express has become more multi-purpose.